Well, I'm very fond of The Howling, which was a surprise success in America, but opened in France first, and because I was coming off the Avoriaz Film Festival, where we did not win first prize, to their everlasting shame, so we came to Paris with the UGC was distributing, and we did the rounds, and I watched the picture with a lot of different audiences. Kids seemed to particularly like it. But it was a gateway for me because a lot of people saw it, and it sort of put my name on the map internationally. And so it ultimately led to me working for movie studios and making movies with Steven Spielberg. I have a lot of affection for the movie. Mm-hmm. The Howling was a low-budget movie, a little higher budget than my previous movies, but nonetheless still pretty small. And when I started working for the studios, obviously there was a great deal more money to spend, and there were a lot of expertise, and I was very impressed to be having so many people around me who were professionals. And in the low-budget field, a lot of the people you work with are like yourself, just sort of starting out, and so you don't have a lot of experience. But when you get onto the lot of the studio, everybody's been doing it for years. There's people who've been working there since the 40s, and they know all the tricks and stuff. And there's just a tremendous amount to learn. So it was definitely a stepping stone.
Now The Howling is a masterpiece of the werewolf movies.
If you say so.
Yeah. we both think it. What did you want to do with this film? What was your idea?
Well, I was working on another film at the time. I was doing a picture called Jaws 3 People 0, which was supposed to be the third Jaws movie. It was a comedy produced by the National Lampoon, and it was having problems. It would have been my first studio movie. A friend of mine was producing The Howling, and they were having director problems. They got rid of their director, and my friend said, why don't you come over here and do a werewolf movie? And I had to wait for my movie to fall apart and time to go over there and look at The Howling. But then the script for The Howling was dire, and it needed a lot of work. And so we started to work on trying to fix it, and brought in John Sayles, who had worked on Piranha for me with Roger Corman, and we managed to turn it into something that was a lot better than the book that it was based on, and certainly better than the screenplay that they had before.
Okay, by the way, we have an interpretation about The Howling, and we have seen recently again the Scrolly solution, and there are similarities like pulsions, the animal side. We wonder if The Howling was a feminine theme at the center, and like a woman in a werewolf and man world. Mm-hmm. With this phrase, don't ever transform yourself. You could become an asshole or something like that. And so, is our viewing relevant?
Well, it does have a female protagonist, and if you've seen the Screwfly Solution, you know that that's a movie about how men get a disease that makes them want to kill women. It's true enough in real life without the disease, but we really identified with the heroine of The Howling, and it is a woman's point of view horror film, which is one of the differences between The Howling and American Werewolf in London. I think that's one of the reasons that it's still relevant, is because there weren't a lot of movies at that time, horror movies, that took that attitude.
Because we had the impression that in the deleted scenes of the Howling, the tension between man and woman was in this deleted scene and less in the final result.
Well, you don't ever get to make entirely the movie that you want, but you also have to figure out what's the pace of the movie. I mean, there's a number of scenes that we took out that I kind of liked, but it really needed to get to where it was going, and so sometimes those things have to disappear. But luckily, with DVDs now, you have the ability to see these scenes that didn't make it. Before that, they all disappeared. They just went into the rabbit hole of history. I've always thought that humor and horror go together in the sense that when people go to a horror movie to be scared, if you do scare them with a jump scare, they go and then they laugh at themselves for being scared. But also horror movies are based usually on premises of great absurdity, and that you have to believe, you have to buy into the idea, okay, the werewolves exist, vampires exist, well, they really don't. So you have to give it that leeway. And so it's always teetering on the edge of being unbelievable. And one of the ways I think that you can sugarcoat that is by giving people something to laugh at. And in the early horror movies in the 30s, there was always a thing called comic relief. There would be a funny reporter or a funny newswoman who would make wisecracks. We were supposed to make the audience at ease in case the movie got too scary. I was particularly influenced by James Whale, who made Bride of Frankenstein and The Invisible Man and some movies like that, where on a dime it can turn from horror into humor and then back again. And that's always been something that appealed to me. And so when it came time for me to make these kind of pictures, I always felt that I needed to put that piece of absurdity into the movie, but lest the audience find it for themselves and laugh in the wrong places. Because the one thing you don't want in a movie that's fantasy is the fact is people don't buy it and they start laughing in the wrong spots. And once you lose them, you lose them. You can't scare them entirely at the top of the peak for the entire movie. You have to have peaks and valleys. And one of the ways to do that is to relax them with a laugh or a joke or something like that. And then once they're relaxed, then you can scare them, and then you can hit them with something they don't expect.
It's like a surprise.
Yeah. Well, at the time, we were trying to use the state-of-the-art effects that we could afford, and I had been very enamored of stop-motion movies, Ray Harryhausen and King Kong, things like that. And I always tried to get a little bit of that into my movies. And there's a little bit in The Howling that's stop motion, but there was a great deal more, which if you've seen the outtakes, you see that they aren't really in the same style as the rest of the movie, and so they mostly had to go, which was very made Dave Allen, the animator, very unhappy. But there's nothing you could do. If it works, it works. It doesn't, it doesn't. We would show the picture to people, and there was a scene in the burning barn with these werewolves, and people would, after the screen, they'd say, "What movie did you get that out of?" And then so that's, you don't want people saying that to you. That's like it's stock footage or something. No, so it didn't work. But as far, I've always been a fan of animation. I mean, I just came from Annecy, and I can't believe it took me that long to get down there to an animation festival. And I have, I was a cartoon kid. I went to the movies and saw cartoons, and I still watch them. Mm-hmm. And so, and as far as practical effects, that's really all we had. We didn't have CGI, we didn't have any of those kind of things, and it's really a form of advanced puppetry. And then when I went to make Gremlins, I really discovered about advanced puppetry. Well, I think most people who start in genre movies are considered second-run people, because those movies never got much respect, even in previous years. So if you came from, for instance, the Roger Corman background of making drive-in movies, that people didn't immediately think, "Oh, here's an Academy Award script, let's give it to this guy." You have to work your way up in order to do that. But yeah, I mean, I don't mind being an outsider. I don't mind not being invited to the big parties and all that kind of stuff, because that's not why I was into this. I was into it because I love movies. It is to the degree that a feature film has to cost a lot of money. It has to make a lot of money. And if you alienate half the audience, then you're not going to, make all that money. I prefer mainly to make my points subversively, so that I can say that I've made a point, but I didn't hit them over the head with a hammer. However, when things started to get bad in the 90s, and I did the Masters of Horror episodes, one of them, the zombie one, is a blatant hammer to George Bush. I mean, and what was going on with the Iraq War and the cheerleading and the media that was going on. It was very agonizing. So I made that, and then when I was the next year, and I made the Screwfly Solution, which is probably the only film I've ever made that has no humor in it, because it was such a horrible story. And then Second Civil War, I re-encounter that movie every so often, sometimes at festivals, and different aspects of the movie are always relevant, and so much of that movie has come true and is still coming true, that it's almost, if it weren't for the shape of the TV screens, you wouldn't even know that it was made so long ago. And that's a movie that is much less well known in America, but is one of the movies I'm most proud of.
Well, let's talk about Hollywood industry.
Oh, let's not. What Hollywood industry? There is no Hollywood industry. It's been COVIDed to death. The combination of COVID, theaters closing, movies being abandoned, having to make a movie wearing a mask all the time, that was very daunting. But now the ownership of the studios has changed to a point where the people who are running the place now they might as well be making carburetors or flower pots. They don't have any feel for movies. They don't love movies. They're not people who grew up watching movies. They're businessmen. They're pure businessmen. And the atmosphere in Hollywood is, I would like to say, uncreative. The only thing that keeps it going is the idea that Netflix has transformed the distribution pattern so that people can now, see a movie by pushing a button. The movies that I grew up loving were movies that I had to go to trouble to see. I had to, put my clothes on, go out of the house, go to the theater, pay my money, or if it's a family, they had to get a babysitter, and then see the movie, and then come home and talk about it. Well, that's an event in your life. It's not an event in your life to just change channels. And so many people have been disappointed by making movies that the people who financed them suddenly decided, we don't want to put this in theaters, it's too much trouble, so we'll just put it on TV, where it's buried in there's so many things on television. I mean, nobody even knows how many channels there are. There's so many channels and so many new distribution places. I mean, there's a new billboard in LA every week, and it's in the Spike channel. I mean, who has the Spike channel? I never heard of it. And now all the companies are diversifying to put plus after their name so that they can take their movies and put them, on TV. And a lot of the people who make these movies are extremely disappointed that they're not going to be seen on a big screen. But worse, they're not going to be seen with an audience. Because the only way that you can really gauge whether a movie's working is whether you see it with an audience. And you see it at home, it's the same movie, but it's not. It's small. It's been reduced in its impact. And so I don't see. I think theaters will always be around because young people need a place to go, but the number of theaters in Hollywood is sadly diminished. And frankly, one of the things that's encouraging about France is that there are a lot of theaters, and there's a lot of people who still want to go to the movies, even after the lockdown. But I'm not so sure that's true everywhere else.
And did you feel free one day in your career?
Free? Yeah, when I was making Gremlins 2, I felt free because they said, well, we want another Gremlins movie, and we don't understand the first one, so why don't we have you back and make another one? We'll let you do whatever you want. So it was like, wow, I got all this money. I got, as I said, all these craftsmen around me, and it can come directly from my id, and I can make whatever I want. And I did, and I was very happy with it. Well, it's now easier to make a movie than it ever was. I mean, you can make it on your computer, you can edit it on your computer, you get your friend to do the music, you get your friends to be in it. The only problem with making the movie is then getting it seen. Because there's how many movies are there on YouTube that nobody even knows what they are? And they're perfectly good movies made by people who will never get them seen by people who can do them any good. And there are not as many venues to go to anymore. There's not that many places that used to be. When I was working for Corman, if you made a movie that wasn't bad or you made a movie that made money, people noticed you. and then somebody eventually would come and pluck you out of the Corman School, and you'd get a chance to make a movie for a studio. That's completely gone now. That doesn't exist. So I mean, where do these kids show their wares? I don't know. The thing about horror movies is that it's very difficult to make a movie that isn't a rip-off of some other movie, or isn't a copy of something that's already been done, and particularly in horror movies, because now that everybody's aware of all the tropes and aware of all the gimmicks and the history of horror movies, it's very difficult to surprise them, and surprise is an element of doing those films. So it's difficult to try to break out of the pack with something that's really new and exciting. Now, obviously, Jordan Peele was able to do that with Get Out, and apparently he's doing it with Nope, which hasn't Nope, but I haven't seen it. But it's got a great trailer. I mean, there are people who are still, managing to plug away and try to do something new, which is great. It's just a hard genre to do things new in. Well, you mean like Stranger Things?
For example?
Well, that's an example of something that derives from the things that its makers saw when they were younger. The 80s, the 80s are to them what the 50s were to me. I mean, the things that formed them was what they saw when they were kids, and now they want to do something like that. And it doesn't bother me. I mean, it's okay with me. I don't have to necessarily watch it because there's no surprises for me because I've already done that.
Mm-hmm. So you think it's the legacy of the previous generation was formed by Universal and so on, and so each generation.
Each generation is formed by the things they saw and liked when they were younger, and then they go off to try to make something in that vein. Not always. I mean, sometimes they just say, I don't want to do that. That's old. Everybody's doing that. I'll do something new, which is great. But then you've got to find somebody to bankroll it. I'm basically doing independent films now when I do a film. The lure of working for the studios has lost its luster because although there's more money, there is such a layer of interference that you just too many people telling you what to do who don't know what they're talking about. So I prefer to work with less and try to be able to make something more personal.
It's a way to be free as possible.
Oh, I have a movie about Roger Corman making the trip in 1967, which I've been trying to hawk for 10 years. I've got a couple of TV series. I got one is called Mindbenders. Another one is a remake of a picture called Best of Youth, which was an Italian film. I mean, these are all things that you take around and try to get people to finance, but that's the difficult part. Sometimes it can take years. That's very common. That's an attraction in Los Angeles.
Because we were surprised.
They run they have a big wall and they run movies in the graveyard where many of the people who made those movies are now resting. And and people bring picnic baskets, and it's very festive for a graveyard.
Okay. Oui.
Oh, come on, you're going to ask something, aren't you?
It's my questions, but in English it's better.
You want to try?
Your English isn't bad.
Yeah.
Come on, get with it.